Hi everyone, and thanks for joining. Today we're going to talk about Apple and why it's been in hot waters for the past week after announcing it's going to introduce later this year 3 changes to curb child sexual abuse. Let's find out how this affects you. The first change Apple will deploy applies to Apple Search and Siri. If a user searches for any child sexual abuse related topic, Apple will redirect the user to resources to report this or in getting professional help. The platforms that will have this protocol will be iOS 15, watchOS 8, iPadOS 15, and macOS Monterey. The second control that Apple is planning to implement affects the app Messages. If the account has been set up as child account in family sharing, Apple's algorithm will scan the images sent and received in Messages, and if the picture is identified as sexually explicit, it will be blurred and the child will be presented with resources to block the image. And if the child is 12 years old or younger, the device will notify the infant that if he or she decides to override the control to visualize the image, an alert will be sent to the parents informing so. For child accounts between 13 to 17, the minor is also warned if they wish to view or share the image, but parents are not notified in this case. And the third and most controversial change that Apple will be deploying this year is an artificial intelligence called NeuralHash, whose aim is to scan the images that Apple users wish to upload and share on iCloud to detect and alert the authorities if the user is in possession or distributes child sexual abuse material, also known as CSAM. So why has this caused so much controversy? Let's begin by understanding what NeuralHash is. According to Apple, NeuralHash is a perceptual hashing function that maps images into numbers by using certain features identified in the picture that are not necessarily pixel-based. The result is a numeric code or hash that is the same for nearly identical images. This can be a pair of pictures where one of them has been resized or has a different resolution or has a different color scale. Otherwise, if 2 pictures have different content, then their respective hashes would also be different, like the ones shown in your screen right now. The hash is then compared to other known hashes containing child sexual abuse material images that are provided by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC, and if a match is found, a safety voucher is generated. Once a certain number of safety vouchers passes a threshold only known to Apple, the images are decrypted and an Apple employee may verify whether the material constitutes a criminal offense, and if so, the account will be disabled and the user reported to the authorities. So, is NeuralHash applicable to all devices? Well, Apple has stated that it is planning to deploy NeuralHash on their iPhones and Macs later this year, and that the protocol is triggered when the user tries to upload or synchronize the pictures with iCloud, meaning that NeuralHash will not scan the images stored exclusively on the user's device. After all, Apple said that the device belongs solely to the user, but iCloud belongs to Apple. And despite the wide support to curb child sexual abuse, many users and organizations, including tech giant Facebook and WhatsApp, have expressed their concerns around NeuralHash for potentially being the first step towards breaching the user's privacy. And so because of this public outcry, Apple has released a document to answer the most common concerns coming from the public in an attempt to relieve the reluctancy around the implementation of NeuralHash. You can access the full document in the description of this video in case this impacts your user experience. So which of these changes do you believe will curb child sexual abuse the most? Let us know in the comments, but also tell us if you think that Apple should have the right to simply scan the images that users upload into iCloud. And moving on to neurology, a new study conducted at the Georgia Institute of Technology suggests that the baseline size of the pupil is directly related with the cognitive ability of an individual. In other words, the larger the pupil, the more intelligent in terms of reasoning, attention, and memory. But why? Let's begin by understanding how the research was carried out. Firstly, the scientists measured the differences in the amount of mental effort people use to complete memory tasks. But how did they measure something that appears to be almost impossible to quantify, like in this case, mental effort? Precisely, by measuring the amount of pupil dilation. So 500 volunteers aged between 18 and 35 were made to stare at a blank screen for 4 minutes, while an eye tracker computed the average size of the pupil for each individual at rest. test. Next, the volunteers completed 3 cognitive tests, the first one being the capacity to reason through new problems, also known as fluid intelligence. The second test in relation to the ability to remember information, or also known as working memory capacity. And the last test around the ability to focus the attention when presented with distractions and interference, also known as attention control. The research concluded that a larger baseline pupil size was correlated with a significantly higher scores for the first and third tests, namely fluid intelligence and attention control, and to a lesser degree, working memory capacity. And the million-dollar question: why? Why do larger pupils imply higher cognitive capacity? Well, according to science, the pupil size is related to the activity in the locus coeruleus, a region in the brain that regulates processes as perception, attention, learning, memory, and helps coordinate distant brain regions to accomplish challenging tasks. Dysfunction of the locus coeruleus has been linked to conditions such as Alzheimer's disease and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. One hypothesis for this is that individuals with larger pupils present greater regulation of the brain activity by the locus coeruleus. Who would have thought that the eyes were not only the mirror to the soul, but also the mind? Let's move on to cybersecurity, where a new artificial intelligence is creating fake documents to deceive hackers. The algorithm called WeForge, that is, word embedding based fake online repository generation engine, geez, that was a long one, generates decoys of patents under development to protect intellectual property. The idea behind WeForge is to create several fake versions of every critical document that a company may need to protect, increasing drastically the difficulty of a potential cyber attack and ransomware. In other words, the hackers are faced with the daunting task of figuring out which of the countless similar documents is the real one. So more than just concealing data, WeForge specializes in falsifying technical information. Testing of WeForge included the production of fake patents in the fields of chemistry and computer science, which were then put side by side with real patents. Graduates from these fields were then asked to distinguish the forged documents, who stated these were highly elaborate and believable files. In addition, WeForge decoy documents could also act as tripwires by alerting the company if a fake document has been accessed. Companies have been creating decoy files for some time now, but the difference is that they were human created, but having an artificial intelligence doing it would mean orders of magnitude more decoys that are very believable for an attacker, and without the need of human workforce. On average, a cyber attack goes an incredible 312 days unnoticed until the corporation finally identifies the intrusion. That is almost a year of free buffet for these criminal organizations, enough time as WeForge developer and Dartmouth distinguished professor in cybersecurity, Venkatramana Subramanian said, and I quote, "to steal not only the crown jewels, but the jewels of the maid and the watch of the secretary," end quote. And by the way, if you want to know how the recent cyber attack on the largest US oil company evidence how corporations and governments are for the new cyber era, make sure to check our video on Colonial Pipeline cyber attack and ransomware. In the meantime, stay in the know with Cyberstruck.